One part of economic geography that's very important is looking at the economic development status of countries.
Most countries go through stages that's been categorized by Rostow. They all start out as traditional societies, subsistence activities, subsistence agriculture. Then they move into various types of specialization, agricultural surplus, start specializing perhaps in some simple industrial products, and then with the right amount of investment, they can industrialize, and that's called the takeoff stage. And as countries industrialize, hopefully, if they're lucky, they will diversify and gain more industries. And then, as a percentage of employment in the sectors, there'll be more and more in the services, and things will kind of level off at that point. Well, that's the path that most countries go through in the developed world. How do you actually measure economic development? There are different ways to do that. One way is through gross national income per capita. Well, what's gross national income? So it's the all the money in the country, and it's per capita because it's divided by how many people you have in the country. So some countries have a lot of people, but they're relatively poor countries because most people don't have very much money. And other countries, they're small in population size, but everyone's quite wealthy. So you have to do this on a per capita basis. And so what do we see on this map of GNI per capita? Well, you can see a clear distinction between the developed countries and the less developed countries. Sub-Saharan Africa stands out as being poor. Southern and Central Asia also poor. There's a big difference between Eastern and Western Europe. But sometimes you can't use measures such as gross national income or gross national product because of problems in measuring them. To try to offset that, there's purchasing power parity, which takes into account the not only the standards of living, but the costs of living. In many areas in the less developed world, the cost of living is less. And here's an updated view on that. So here the distinction between developed and less developed would be a little more clear. Well, things like per capita income, they have their problems, though, because there is an entire informal economy. A good example of that are a number of the personal and business services. For example, in the United States, when someone goes to get their hair cut, they go to the hair salon and spend, I don't know, 20 bucks, 50 bucks, 125 bucks at the beauticians. And so that's calculated in to the gross national product. But in a less developed country, if someone gets a haircut, well, a family member does it, or a neighbor specializes, does that. And it's never recorded, it's never added into the gross national product of the country. So it's called the informal economy. Certain under the table businesses, the trade in illegal drugs, and so forth is also another part of this informal economy. It's not official, and sometimes that can be significant because people still get to have those personal and business services. It's just that they're not counted. So looking at things like gross national product between countries is sometimes a very unfair measure. And here's an example of the size of the informal economy in the different regions. in a place like Africa, the informal economy, that's most of the employment. Less so in Latin America, that's industrialized, and they're keeping better records of that. All right, so the informal economy in the less developed world has to be taken into consideration. Now, this is a very important series of pie charts. It looks at the changing percentage of U.S. labor force in the different sectors. In 1850, well, most of the population in the United States were primary workers. That most people were farmers or farm families or in mining. And there was some industrialization because the mid-1800s was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in the United States, and the service to support the industry and the agricultural activities was a smaller part of that. But over time, the wedge for primary workers, and most of that would be agricultural workers, has steadily shrank to 1900, 1950, 2018. Less than 1% of the U.S. workforce is in agriculture, mining, and commercial fishing and so forth. And the amount in the industry, those wedges increased substantially. By 1900, the U.S. was in full industrial revolution. 1950, just after World War II, that was the big manufacturing boom in the United States. And so that's a good thing. But the manufacturing sector has steadily shrunk. Well, is that good or bad? Most people in 2018, 79% of the population were engaged in the service sector, service jobs. Well, is that good? As a general rule, the greater percentage a country has in the service industry or the tertiary, the higher sectors, the better off they are. But what kind of service? Are they, unskilled clerical hamburger flipping type jobs, or are they white collar professional services, lawyers and insurance managers and so forth? There's quite a variation in what we call services. All right, and so today we're in what's called a post-industrial economy, because we're not so industrial anymore. We're not manufacturing isn't a big part of the employment. We still manufacture a lot of product in the United States, but with automation and so forth, you don't have as much employment in it. Basically, what we're doing now, we're just buying and selling the industrial product that's made somewhere else. And this graph should bear that out. Let's see, some examples for least developed, newly industrialized, industrial, post-industrial. Yes, for us, we don't have many in manufacturing. It's almost all services. Even in some of the least developed countries, they also have some services, more so in manufacturing. Agriculture, again, that's what you would expect in a subsistence type economy. Thailand, newly industrialized, so a lot more in manufacturing, new industries, construction, but a growing service industry too. South Korea is also kind of like us. They're still in a pretty good industrial phase. A lot of things are being manufactured in South Korea, and that's good for their economy. But they're making the Kias and the Hyundais and the LGs and so forth, and we're just buying and selling them. They're in the industrial sector, and we're in the commercial tertiary services sector of buying and selling those industrial products. All right, let's see. To wrap this section up, transportation, yes, is very important. When you look at this map, it shows all those areas that are serviced. And where we are in the developed world, it's all pretty well serviced. And there are some isolated areas of the world. Okay, next up, we're going to take up the topic of agriculture.